attending tonight's commission meeting. At this time, I'll ask the clerk to announce the meeting and to call the roll.
Roll call. Maddox.
Here.
Kane. Markley. Here. Walters. Philbrook. Here. Walker. Townsend.
Here.
McKiernan.
Here.
Mugia. Here. Holland.
Here. Thank you very much. This evening, the invocation is being given by Sister Therese Bangert of Our Lady in St. Rose Catholic Church. Please stand for the prayer and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Creator God, we bow our heads before you, and we come calling on you. Sometimes the violence around us is overwhelming. The violence in our community, including just blocks from here. Pour your grace on the victims and their families, the perpetrators and their families, and the police officers whose spirits first encounter it. The violence in our metro, specifically we pray this evening for all the victims, the perpetrator, and the police officers touched by the Overland Park hate crimes. And in all this you call us, God, you call us to be instruments of your peace. Alongside the violence, God, our eyes are filled with your creation's spring beauty. It is abundant and astounding in this, our community. Bless these commissioners and all gathered this evening for this meeting. Rain down your spirit so that the thoughts and decisions here bring healing and new life to all who live and work in Kansas City, Kansas. And I pray in the name of the risen Jesus, amen. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Sister Therese, for being here tonight. We appreciate it. Ms. Cobbins, are there any revisions to tonight's agenda?
There are no revisions, Mr. Mayor.
That brings us to tonight's consent agenda. The items on this consent agenda will remain and be voted on as one unless some commissioner, staff, or citizen in attendance tonight wishes to set aside an item. If you set it aside, we will handle that item individually by a single vote. Commissioner Murguia. Which item is that?
Consent agenda item number 1.
Funding for the Downtown Y?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Are there any others?
No.
I'd like to remove item number 5, our TIF policy. Let the record show there's no one else moving to the podium at this time. It's been moved and seconded. Roll call.
Roll call. Maddox.
Aye.
Kane.
Aye.
Markley.
Aye.
Walters. Philbrook.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Mugia.
Aye.
The vote is 9-0. That motion carries.
All right, that brings us to item number 1 from the consent agenda. It was set aside by Commissioner Murguia. I'll ask you to speak to that.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and I apologize. I was not in attendance at the Economic Development and Standing Committee meeting where this was discussed. I was out of town. So I wanted to take the opportunity to make these comments in a public setting so that everybody knew what my position was. When proposals like this come forward, I think it's very important when we make a decision to spend taxpayer money that the proposer understand clearly that once they receive government money, that their agency becomes an open book. And that they, when they spend public tax dollars, in essence, that entity becomes public. So earlier this week, I had asked for a list of people that were members at the Downtown Y, and I was denied that list. I think there must have just been a misunderstanding, but I just wanted to say that it's my understanding that when you receive public dollars, you become a public agency and people have access to that information. The second comment is, I also think that when we spend money like this, that we need to link the money to our unified government goals. Now, I don't know exactly what the goal is other than to keep the Y open. I could make the assumption that it's to improve our health rankings, which is a good goal, and I agree with that goal. But it would be good to know if research supports that thinking. Does health get better when you have access to a health facility in Wyandotte County? I don't know the answer to that, but I would guess that it might. So I could see us working on that. We also should be accountable to the public that when we spend their money on something like this, and we have that goal in mind, that we should be able to demonstrate to the public whether we met that goal or not. So after that money is spent, the public should be entitled to some sort of report that says, yes, health rankings went up, or people weighed less, or whatever the goal is for us spending the money, whatever that is. My third concern is we need to be strategic and thoughtful about every tax dollar that we spend. And all of us up here have agreed to that during the budget process. So I would just encourage us that these kinds of requests should be handled during the budget, not out of budget. Now, Mayor, all of that said, I am very supportive of this request. I appreciate your passion in particular to improve the health rankings in Wyandotte County. And I could become as big of a cheerleader for a project like this if, when we spent this kind of money, there were goals connected to it. So I would like to be in that position to be a big cheerleader for this. So in the future, if there's going to be additional requests, I need to know how we're a better community because of that money that we spent. So with all that said, unless there are a whole bunch of other comments, I would move to approve.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Commissioner Maddox.
Thank you, Mayor. I had a few questions for either the director of the YMCA or the people that may be here in favor of the project.
Okay, we have several people here from the Y. We have Jenny Myers, who's in our legal department, who has negotiated the contract. We've also have Michael Ferris is here tonight, who is the director of the 8th Street, Kansas City, Kansas Y. So who?
Yeah, probably the director.
Okay, Mr. Ferris, if you could step forward, please.
And then also whoever brought the proposal forward.
Good evening.
Good evening.
You could state your name and address for the record, please.
Yep. Michael Ferris.
Thank you.
Okay, the first question I had is, are there any public free programs that take place at the YMCA weekly or monthly at this current moment?
Yes, sir.
And,
Go ahead.
and if so, what days of the week and what time?
Yes, sir. Currently, commissioners, we offer a Y-Weight program that is open to the public. It's a program that provides nutrition aspects, provides information on individuals to help them with weight loss, and that takes place every Thursday at our YMCA from 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. Every Thursday is open to the community. They do not have to be a member of the YMCA to participate, but it's to help them with access their healthy goals and go over nutritious foods. We also have a program called Salsa Sabor y Salud, which focuses on nutrition for Hispanic and Latino families, where the families have access to our YMCAs in Wyandotte County and our other 14 YMCA centers as well across the metro area.
Thank you. I had those questions because I also wanted the people in TV land to be able to know and understand if there was times they could go to the YMCA for free. I also wanted to know, and this may be a question for staff or others at some point, when it comes to the point, I think the YMCA may be interested in moving facilities or things like that. When the unified government spends, you know, I know last year I believe it was 150 K or something like that. I'm interested in what is our approach to maybe purchase the building. I mean, I know we're giving public funds, but what are some other things that we can do where we actually get something in return for our money. I know we need different localities for juvenile centers or young people, and so when we put that money out in that regard, I'd like to see if that's a possibility instead of just paying for a program. So in the future, I understand that the proposal may come back again next year, maybe the possibility of looking into ways to where we could purchase that building and use it for some services that we may need as far as unified government. And I also wanted to say this, that I think often this money comes from the Park and Rec Department. The Parks and Rec facilities in our city, they are somewhat falling apart. They need more programs, and they need more things. And so when we move forward to take that money and necessarily move it over, I'm just hoping that at some point we will also look into our public facilities and see the things that we need to fix and some of the things that we need to do. So just moving forward, I too am in favor and will vote in favor of this, but I just wanted to know what programs were free to the public. And then I also wanted to say, when it comes to our Parks and Rec Department and we start to spend that money, I'd like to see more in our actual Parks and Rec facilities at this point. So I just wanted to put that out there, and I thank you guys for your time.
Thank you. Commissioner Walker.
Mike, can you send me that in an email, the actual program that you have for the public? Okay, thank you.
My first question is, do you know the breakdown on the county of residents of the membership?
We have 663 membership units. All of those individuals are county residents. There's specific zip codes. I don't have that information for you, but if you
They
need
all
that,
live in
Commissioner.
Wyandotte County. There's no Johnson County members.
At our facility? Correct.
I have to say that at this point, I'm optimistic that the mayor will have something very, very good to tell you or tell us on May 8th. But this will be the last time I will vote to support any additional subsidies for the Y. You come back next year because the project hasn't moved along, I'm at least one that, I don't see why we should subsidize 632 people with the money that we're given when we've got a lot of other places where the people really do need the subsidy. And I doubt your membership is of the members I know don't need a subsidy. So I'll vote for it this time because it would appear that we need the transition, but I don't know what anybody else is going to do, but I'm not voting for it anymore.
Can I?
Yes, go ahead.
So, about a year ago, we were at 559 membership units. We've had tremendous growth over the past year, and I think that we're continuing on that path to increase health and opportunities to our community members in Wyandotte County, not just with the free programming that I already mentioned. We also have efforts with our REACH programming, which is a grant that acronym that stands for Racial and Ethnic Approaches to Community Health, where the YMCA is having impact all over Wyandotte County. We're offering free soccer days to young people the ages of 5 to 12. We have those events taking place on 4 Saturdays a month throughout the months of April and May. So young people can come out. We're encouraging them to stay physically active and bringing their parents out. So we're having a far-reacher impact than just the 5,000 members that utilize the facility. We're able to impact more of the community with some of those outreach efforts as well. Yeah. And thank you, Bill. The membership units, when we speak of those, it's not just 663 individuals. Those are households. So the overall impact that we have, or individuals that we're serving, is a little over 5,000 that utilize the facility on a regular basis.
I continue.
Yes?
My comment on that subject was based on the prior experience that we have had with upper management. At some point, the public needs to stop paying for the benefits to a few, in my opinion. I didn't like the way this matter was handled from the very beginning, with the Y basically pulling out and then being kept open by public dollars. I like the Y. I'm not against the Y. I think every community should use the YMCA as much as possible. But it is not a taxpayer-supported entity. It wasn't when I was a kid. I belonged to this Y down here. Had to take a bus from Argentine to come up here to use it. I mean, I'm all for the Y, but it's just not to be subsidized by taxpayers' dollars forever. And there's some other topics I'm not going to support that are on life support with taxpayer dollars. We don't have them to give away. If we did, I'd be glad to give you all of them we could and keep this building operating. So, having said that, I'm done. This is the last time I will vote to approve any money for this YMCA.
Thank you, Commissioner Walker.
Okay, there is a motion and a second. I see no other commissioners wishing to speak. Roll call.
Roll call, Maddox.
Aye.
Kane. Markley.
Aye.
Walters. Philbrook.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Mugia.
Aye.
The vote is 9-0. That motion carries.
Thank you.
All right. That brings us to item number 5, the resolution on economic development regarding TIFs. This was a project that the staff has worked extensively on. The Economic Development Standing Committee worked this very carefully. This is a significant enough policy that I wanted to have an overview tonight for the entire commission. TIF is one of the most frequent tools we use. We've used it historically. We've done a lot of analysis about when TIF is successful and when it's not successful. And if we could just take a few minutes to address that, I would appreciate it. I'd first like to ask Commissioner McKiernan, you chaired the committee and worked on this. Do you have anything that you'd like to state before the staff makes their presentation?
Well, on the committee, we've been very appreciative of the staff because as they went back and analyzed the TIF projects that we had both residentially and commercially, they reported to me and to the committee that they had learned several things over the years. Well, we do this different than we used to. Well, we're more cautious of this now. Well, we look at this forecast rather than that one. And so what we encouraged them to do was to actually put some of the lessons learned more explicitly into the policy revision that they were doing anyway, which I think that they've done and now gives a much better roadmap for people in the future who are in their department who are considering future deals that might use this particular tool. So I'd like to express our appreciation for really making it much more explicit.
Doug, do you want to invite Mr. Brakovich forward? Do you have any statements that you'd like to make in anticipation of that?
Well, I will do that. As they're coming forward, I will state, and I think Commissioner McKernan has stated it very well, it is really a matter as over the past, I will say, decade, as we've evolved through doing different projects, we have lined up different ways of doing our analysis, different structures that's come in. I would say probably one of the greatest ones has been the involvement of the finance department within economic development when we start to break out a project. And as you saw, George Brakovich, who's our Director of Economic Development, and Lou Levin, our Chief Financial Officers, were chiefly the ones that put together the documents for this. And at this point, I'll let George go ahead and step through some of the points we've learned in this process.
Thank you, Mr. Bach, Mayor, Commissioners. Thanks for the opportunity tonight. We'll try to keep our comments fairly brief, but we are appreciative of the opportunity to present it to you. Commissioner McKiernan did a fantastic job of outlining what the process was and how we came to these directives, and the committee members, the input that they gave along the way. It really started with the financial analysis report on TIFs. We took a look at the existing residential and the existing commercial TIFs and really looked at the annual revenue each of those projects produced. Was it covering the debt that was issued, or the annual debt coverage for that particular bond issuance? And really that's where it started. And we noticed a trend that some of our older TIFs weren't performing quite as well, and the committee members had great questions of, well, why are the newer ones performing better? the obvious answer was Lou Levin's doing a great job. So, but that wasn't a short, sweet enough answer, so we did delve into it a little bit more. And so what we came up with is really 2 additional things to put into the Local Economic Development Policies TIF section. And really they're categorized as policy directives and recourse options. And it's really a combination of things we did do in the past, but maybe certain economic factors during the time influenced, and we made some changes. And so we really thought, well, this is a great opportunity to shore up those things that we've learned. So policy directives, Lou, a lot of these are really in your area, so I don't know if you want to make some comment, but I'll start with feasibility studies. One of the things we noticed right off the bat is some of our residential TIFs, we were very optimistic and we couldn't forecast the downturn in the economy, and so we had projects build out at a much more rapid rate than what was really going to happen. And so one of the things we do now is really stagger our feasibility studies and take a much more conservative approach to really allow, hey, if the project performs better than expected, fantastic, but if it should hit another economic downturn or snag, we have the ability to overcome that. Lou, Bond.
Yeah, I think what we've attempted to add to the policy is almost a checklist that when we bring forward TIFs to standing committee and commission, if we address the items on the checklist. And we have a series of bullets here that we've identified. I think our overall goal is how can we ensure that the performance of the TIF is at a high level or a strong level, and at the same time, how can we minimize our future risk if we move forward and approve a TIF plan. So George alluded to feasibility studies. I'm just going to briefly comment on the bullets that you see on this policy directive. So the second one is bonding options, and where our goal or objective is really to structure the TIF as a pay-as-you-go on a pay-as-you-go basis, as opposed to providing a general obligation bond pledge. So if we issue debt, our intent is that the revenue generated from the TIF would pay for that debt. If we go to a general obligation backing for the project, it's going to be explicitly a policy decision by this governing body, and it would be for really projects that are, I'll say, more difficult to finance. The next one is evaluate a minimum level of property tax payments, and so what we've tried to structure in recent TIFs is some guarantee by the developer that we're going to say that the property value or in the subsequent TIF increment, we have a guaranteed level of payments, and that will ensure the performance of the TIF. Before we issue debt or have any initial reimbursement to the developer, we're talking about performance measures, and that might be that the developer has to have property acquisition in place, might have if part of the financing is coming from a bank, we have to have a clear letter of commitment from the bank. Or if it's a residential project, and we've done this in a couple of our recent ones, is before there's any reimbursement, the developer has to actually build a certain number of units. So that's what we're talking about, performance measures. In any TIF, we'll look closely at how have we minimized the government's investment in terms of property and sales tax payments that are pledged to the TIF. The next item refers to the district and project plan. The commission, there's really 2 steps by the commission's process. They approve a district plan, and then subsequently a project plan when there's a firm project plan, and there might be a development agreement associated with that project plan. Once the commission approves the project plan, there's the TIF clock begins, and that's a 20-year clock where we can recover monies that are generated from the TIF. So we don't want to, I guess what we're saying here is we don't want to move forward with the approval of that project plan until we really have definite commitments in place. And if we, by implementing a sunset, we'll say to the developer, we're going to go forward with a district plan, but we're going to give you a certain timeline for getting everything in place before we move forward with a project plan. One of the issues we've seen with TIFs in the past is, you know, having a clear understanding of what public infrastructures are required, and they'll be clearly spelled out in a development agreement. Just the last item is when we go before the governing body, if we have a developer who we've had issues with in the past as it relates to TIF performance, we actually might look at those individual proposals a little more closely and be a little more restrictive on what we're willing to pledge to the developer. So those are the different directives that we've added to the TIF policy. The second item here is recourse options, and basically here we've tried to identify what can we do if the TIF is not performing at the level where we'd like to see, or how can we improve performance. We do have the ability, working with bond counsel, to restart the TIF, and that might mean the TIF clock where we close out the TIF where we are today and restart that clock. We've fine-tuned our NRA policy, and that's to sort of combine NRA incentives with TIF incentives. That's one thing we've looked at. We have, if we've issued debt for the TIF and we're in the out years, I'll just for example say that TIF has a 20-year clock and we're at year 11, we might have the opportunity to refinance the debt and create additional savings in our coverage. The other items I'll just briefly allude to, we might look at when we terminate a TIF, have specific language on non-compliance if the developer hasn't met compliance requirements in the development agreement. We always have the ability to modify the project plan, and we could put in the development agreement actually options to take property if there's non-performance of the TIF. So we wanted to, and I want to give mention to Commissioner Walters. He was one of the driving forces, as well as the committee, on just making certain that we had a little more structure to our TIF policy, and the TIF policy actually is part of our overall economic development policy. And again, the commission approved a number of policies, actually 9 different policies, in the latter part of 2013 and in January of this year. And we think the changes that we've implemented in this policy actually strengthen it, and it provides us with a checklist when we move forward to standing committee and the full commission.
All right. Thank you very much. Please.
Thank you, Lou and George. I want to kind of dovetail onto what Lou said at the end. Really do appreciate the input from this committee. I mean, this is a committee, I will say, that staff brings a lot of stuff to, works hard, but this committee in turn works staff hard as well. And it was a lot of critical thinking and questions that came from the committee that had us go back and spend some time digging into things and working through different ways and just exploring, well, we've changed the way we do things, and I think it was just the assumptions that we've made. Well, we know what we're doing, but the staff committee made it very clear that you need to get that down in policy, so we're carrying through in those actions for years to come, and that we get a full understanding of where they're at. So it was really a very engaging session, I think, as we went through this, and I really do commend the committee for the way they dug into this project and challenged staff and pushed us through it.
Thank you. Commissioner Walker.
A couple of questions. Are we supposed to choose from these recourse options, or where is the written complete policy at? Are we waiting on it?
The policy should have been in your RFA, Commissioner, the revised policy.
In here? All right, well, then perhaps I've missed it. Let me ask you this question then. If we had the, did we have any single-family TIF projects succeed?
Yes. Turtle
Example,
Hill,
which one?
Turtle Hill, Palo Vista.
Well, now wait a minute. Carmel. How much money did we put into Palo Vista to make sure it succeeded? Over and above the TIF?
Well, we recovered all the debt associated with it.
Okay. It seemed to me that there was such a negative on single family that there would have been a ban, or, unless there was adequate collateral in some other way, on single family TIF projects. My impression is that they're mostly upside down floating in the water right now. Is that wrong?
No, we have, and we provided a full report to the commission on
Yes.
where the
We're on
current
TV
TIF
now.
projects stand, and there are several that are residential projects that are, I'll say, at the non-performance level, or they're not meeting the debt requirements.
And we have none of those recourse options available to us.
At this time, we've made the general obligation bond pledge. Ken Moore's here. He might be better able to, he looked at the specific development agreements. I'll invite him to make comment.
Well, Commissioner, I think the major difference is in some of the earlier TIFs that have not performed is that the performance measures did not take into consideration the downturn in the market, and so a lot of their securities were released at a certain level of performance. For example, if they built 10% of the structure they were supposed to, then the letter of credits and performance guarantees were waived, and with the assumption that they were going to go on and build out. That's, of course, one of the lessons we've learned that we don't intend to repeat. There's a lot of the TIFs that you can say are non-performing because the project hasn't built out, but on the other hand, we have not issued debt in excess of what we're generating revenues for. So of the probably 2/3 of the TIFs either are performing, or at least they're returning enough revenue to cover the debt. And then we have the remaining ones. At this point in time, we don't have any other recourse.
Well, I found what apparently you must be referring to as the policy, and I apologize. I don't review that. I guess I expected it to be a little bit more detailed in what I have come to call, we've all called legalese. You seem like.
Maybe I can address that. I mean, some of the discussions are out there that are set out in the TIF statute that govern very specific things about it. That was part of the discussion we had at the committee level. We also got into it from an overall, are these policy guidelines that we get into, but we did not want to go into too many specifics, and that was really determined was the best course of action, because as you go through and evaluate each project, you may come up with different ways you want to do something, or different tools you may want to utilize. And if we just want to state a policy right off the bat that X's out certain things, and one being that towards single family, which was an area we had discussion on because we haven't done one in a number of years. And I won't sit here today and say that it would take a strong change probably in the way somebody would come forward with a performa probably before I would recommend one. But we didn't think it was right to go ahead and write a policy that says, no, we won't do one. I think, as Lou was referencing the ones that were successful, we just saw Mount Carmel do their grand openings and such this week in their area. That was a TIF district that was set out. It performed well ahead of schedule. It's just now, I think at 20 years, paid off its TIF as it went through its cycle. Still has homes that could be built in the area, but was a tool that was used to be very successful in coming into that area and doing a good job to take out a lot of blight and such like that. So there may be opportunities for us to come in and see that in the future, but right now, no, I wouldn't say I would jump in, because I think the NRA tool then gets X'd out when you put in TIF today. And the NRA tool is a good enticement to bring back people into the urban core.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Murguia.
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioner Walker, let me see if I can do a little bit better job. Sometimes staff are very objective, and it's hard to understand what they're saying. In my assessment of the information that they provided, we have had significant issues with residential TIFs. So I'm acknowledging what you're saying. You are dead on. We have had significant issues. However, there have been some residential TIFs that have performed. And I was like you during the meeting, I'm part of this committee, and I was like you, I thought, let's just eliminate people's ability to do residential TIFs. But I don't think that really resolves anything, and it definitely penalizes those residential TIF developers that are successful. You know, it's sort of like penalizing everybody for the sins of a few. So we felt it was better as a committee to come up with other ways to review whether or not a TIF was a good investment than eliminating our options. I think, Commissioner Walker, you realize more than anybody, because of your community activity on community development boards that do community development, in particular ONDA, that flexibility is key to being very successful at development. And so having that tool in our toolkit is good. We just need to scrutinize it a little more than what we are to make sure that it's going to perform. Does that make better sense? That was our logic, if that's helpful at all.
Do we have sufficient staff to do the scrutiny that's required?
I think so. I think our staff has done, you know, working with us, they've done a fantastic job. It's difficult, you know, you're getting deals all the time to review all of them in detail. I do think the one thing I like the most about the review process is that when you come to our staff anymore, you don't get to start over if you've had some bad development deals. My concern was, if I'm developer X and I come forward and propose a deal and we get approval and the development goes south and it doesn't do well, and they come back and want to do another development, we were doing business with those people again and again and again. And so what I said is, a lot of times it depends on the developer and their capacity. And once they haven't performed well, we need to really scrutinize them harder. So that's sort of the safety net. So I did want to just add one thing, one of my own comments, and I'm glad you asked, Commissioner Walker, because this issue is very important to me. I don't want to lose our flexibility. We have very diverse community. We have lots of challenges, which George Brakovich can speak to personally, as he works very hard on development all over our county. So we need all the tools out there. We just need to be careful about when we give them out. I did want to ask one thing, and I apologize, this was all part of the meeting that I was out of town over. And one of the things I considered when I reviewed this before the meeting was that a lot of what we brought forward is fantastic. I think you guys did a great job. However, it's reactive to something that's gone negatively. I was wondering if there wouldn't be a way to, and we don't have to do this tonight, but amend our policy so that maybe everybody we give a TIF to, every developer out there that gets a TIF, that they come back annually and just update the standing committee on where that TIF is at in the way of performance. Because I think that does two things. When you're a really high-performing developer and you're very successful at what you do, you should be given a platform to talk about that, so that this commission knows who's really doing a good job and who's not. And the other accountability piece is when that developer comes forward and they're not performing well, the commission should have that opportunity to ask some questions. And I think through that process is how the commission is going to be able to make even better policy around development, is that the commission needs to be more familiar with how development is currently operating. So if there's a way to implement that moving forward, having come back, that'd be fantastic, I think. And thank you, staff, really, you did a fantastic job. This is a very difficult issue.
Well, and I think the greatest advantage of the study, and I really want to thank again the Economic Development Standing Committee for pushing this, for the staff time that's gone into it, because we know there are TIFs that have failed, and we have to learn from that.
Right.
We have to do better. And what I appreciate about what this report does is it kind of separates out the fact from the fiction in terms of what caused them to fail, or what components would have been beneficial to us with them failing. And I think knowing that it's also one of our most powerful economic development tools, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. For the residential single-family homes are the ones that have struggled the most. Multifamily have done better. Commercial TIFs have done tremendously well for us across the board. So I think the structure of it and learning from what components would have been helpful when the recession hit, because really there are two kinds of single-family residential TIFs. There's before the recession and there's after the recession. And the ones that went through the recession took a beating. And we didn't have the tools and the recourse options built into the agreement to handle that, and we ended up taking the beating for it. And so I think what we've learned, we're putting into practice, and I think it's very good to, because TIF has a bad name in a lot of areas, and we just need to make sure we are specific about where it's bad and what policy we can adopt to make it better. But if there's a single-family TIF that comes forward today, there would be an incredible amount of scrutiny because we have not had a good track record with them, and we would need to see a good performance, yes.
In thinking about Commissioner Walker's question, late last year, that we actually terminated one TIF because it had fulfilled all debt requirements. That was Mount Zion, a very successful residential project. And I think, Mayor, what you just mentioned, it was the housing units were built certainly before the recession, actually, I think in the late 90s. And that was an example of one that performed very well.
Thank you. Okay, so this item is before us.
Move to approve the updated TIF policy.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Seeing no further comments, roll call.
Roll call. Maddox. Kane.
Aye.
Markley.
Aye.
Walters. Philbrook.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Mugia.
Aye.
The vote is 8-0. That motion carries.
All right. Before we move to the next item, I do want to recognize some elected officials who are here. Mary Ann Flunder of the Community College is here. Thank you for being here. Sheriff Ash is here, and also a member of the Community College Board. He's done talking, so I won't ask him to come back to the microphone. Jerry Gorman with the DA's office, we appreciate your being here tonight. And Chief Jones is here. Also, it is Take Your Child to Work Day, and I did not bring my child to work, but my child has found his way to work. Daniel is here, sophomore at Sumner, finished up his activities. Welcome, Daniel. Oh, please scratch that from the record. Okay, that brings us to our next item. We are ready for the Standing Committee's agenda. Resolution for Downtown Cinco de Mayo Festival. This was voted on Monday. Commissioner Kane was the committee chair. Commissioner Kane, do you have anything you'd like to say about this? And it was moved to fast track.
Move for approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded for approval. Roll call.
Roll call. Kane. Markley.
Aye.
Walters. Philbrook.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Mugia.
Aye.
The vote is 8-0. That motion carries.
That brings us to the Commissioner's agenda. A travel request by Commissioner Walters for the Kansas Association
Second.
of Commissioners. Roll call.
Roll call. Kane.
Let the record show it is not in Maui.
Aye.
Markley.
Aye.
Walters. Philbrook.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Mugia.
Aye.
The vote is 8-0. That motion carries.
All right, we are now adjourned and we are reassembling as the Land Bank Board of Trustees. All the items on the Board of Trustees
Second.
are on the consent agenda. If anyone would like to remove an item, now is the time. Let the record show I see no one moving to remove an item. Roll call.
Roll call. Kane.
Aye.
Markley.
Aye.
Walters. Philbrook.
Aye.
Walker. Walker.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Mugia.
Aye.
The vote is 8-0. That motion carries.
I'd like the record to show Mr. Slaughter is in attendance wearing a tie tonight. So thank you very much for that outstanding presentation. Okay, that concludes our 7 o'clock meeting. We will adjourn this meeting, and now we will recess from our special session. I'm losing track of time. We're going to go straight into the police presentation, if we're ready with the slide presentation.
All right, Mayor, our next one is the Police Department. So as we concluded the other, thank you very much, Chief Jones. Good job on that presentation. And Colonel Ziegler is here as they bring up the PowerPoint. And as I told you, it's my usual projections. You'd be starting no later than 7:30, Colonel, so we're right on that time.
That's right. While they're pulling that up, we do have one announcement for the evening, and I'll make that prior to this. There will be a Department of Corrections meeting around our parole office at the Argentine Library on May 7th at 6 p.m. that Commissioner Murguia is hosting. So if you are interested, anyone in the public or commission who's interested in being in that discussion on the parole office, you may do that at the Argentine Library May 7th.
When did you say it was, Mayor?
May 7th,
6 o'clock.
6 p.m., May 7th, Argentine Library.
Will you be there, Mayor?
I will have to check my calendar.
If you need a ride, call me.
All right. If you need someone to help you find your way, let me know.
Good evening. On behalf of Chief Ellen Hansen and the Police Department, we'd like to thank the governing body for giving us an opportunity to discuss with you tonight our budget from our perspective. We'd also like to thank the Budgeting Office, the Public Safety Business Office, Human Resources, and the Payroll Office in helping pull all the data together that's used in this presentation. A few things we're going to discuss. The mayor's interested in overtime and the out-of-grade pay. So those are going to be the two things that we talk about in our presentation. And what we're going to be doing as we go through is we're going to be looking at possible drivers of that budget. What causes those budgets to increase and go down? So that's what we're going to do tonight. The first thing we're going to talk about is the historical perspective of our authorized sworn strength or sworn FTEs. From the chart, you can see that in 2006, we had 365 sworn officers. Those were authorized by the governing body for the police department. From 2006 to 2008, we grew that number by 21 positions. The reason we grew the numbers by 21 positions was we added a vice unit, which was 5 new positions for the police department. We added 8 school resource officers so that we could put a police officer in each of the high schools. That's District 500, Turner, Piper, and the Ward High School. We also added 8 officers because the new Midtown Patrol Division came online, and we determined that that was the minimum number of officers that we needed to add in order to open that division and run it 24/7. After 2008, you can see from the chart that we were not authorized any additional FTEs or any additional sworn officers. It's remained flat at 386. So the next thing we looked at was calls for service. How are calls for service impacting our budget? Well, as you look, 2007, there was 245,000 calls for service. And you go across, and it's kind of ebb and flowed over the years. And at 2013 was our second highest year with 234,000 calls for service. It's about 11,000 difference. Calls for service, we determined, wasn't driving our overtime per se. The volume of calls for service weren't. But what does drive our overtime when it comes to calls for service is the late and extended calls. Late calls are an officer's getting ready to go into division, he's getting ready to turn in his equipment, it's 15 minutes before he's getting off, and they put out a robbery call. Well, we dispatch an officer. We dispatch 2 officers to that robbery call. The officers get there, they realize a robbery's occurred, we've got a victim that's been injured, we have loss. They stay on scene, they start calling resources, they start talking to witnesses, completing reports, and collecting evidence. Now, sometimes, if possible, what we do on those instances, when we have the new shift coming in, we will send new shift officers to go out and relieve those 2 officers, depending on how intricately involved they are in the call. Sometimes those officers have to work 5 minutes over, 30 minutes over, an hour over. It just depends. An extended call would be something like one of our officers gets dispatched to Children's Mercy Hospital on a child that's been sexually assaulted. The officer gets there, there's reports to be made, there's interviews to conduct, paperwork to process. He may end up working 5 minutes over. So that's how calls for service impact our overtime budget. The next thing we looked at was crime. Is crime driving our overtime budget? Well, as you look from 1998 to 2013, you can see that we've been on a downward trend. And we classify our crime in 2 categories: property crime and violent crime. This same trend is happening in property crime. It's on a downward trend. The violent crime, we picked it to show tonight because we know that violent crime has the biggest negative impact on the quality of life for our citizens, as well as economic development in the community. As you can see, from 2012 to 2013, the violent crime didn't drop as much as we'd like, but it's still in a downward trend. So then we thought, okay, well, what's driving violent crime down, or one of the factors? Now, I can't stand here tonight and tell you that the police department is the sole cause of violent crime dropping. I can tell you that because of our partnership with the community, because of our partnership with the Wyandotte County Sheriff's Department and other law enforcement agencies and federal agencies, we've had good success in lowering the crime rate. But we look next from 2007 to 2013. Though the bottom 2 charts are misdemeanor arrests by our officers and felony arrests by our officers. They're from 2007 to 13. If you look, it almost follows that as we make more misdemeanor arrests and more felony arrests, violent crime continues to go down. That's a good thing. Here's the impact. We realize that this impacts 2 things in the budget. One of them has nothing to do with the police department. But when we make more arrests, Sheriff Ash has to make a decision regarding staffing and farming out inmates in order to deal with the overcrowding issue in the jail. We don't tell our officers not to make arrests simply because there's a budgetary impact to the unified government or to the police department.
We're grateful for that.
The other thing that's impacted with the number of arrests is our court overtime. As you can see, the court overtime's kind of ebb and flowed throughout the years from 06 to 13. And if you look at 2012 to 2013, you're going to see that our court overtime costs went up. But that also correlates with the number of arrests that we made in 2012 and 2013. One of the things that happens with court, as we make more arrests, municipal court and district court issue subpoenas. Our officers don't have an option of whether or not to show up in court. They have to attend. The majority of our arrests are made on shift 3, which is basically 2 to 10, and shift 1, which is 10 to 6 in the morning. Now, when those officers get those subpoenas, typically court is not held when they're on duty. So anytime they go to court, it's overtime. Well, contract language also dictates that when an officer goes to court, they're compensated 1 hour travel time. Some of our officers drive 20 minutes to court, 20 minutes home, so that's 40 minutes. And you figure, I see all the overtime sheets for the Bureau of Operations, which is my area of responsibility. I see a lot of overtime sheets that come in for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, because either there's a plea agreement made, the case is continued, or whatever. So the 1 hour travel time is a way to be equitable to the officers for them driving in, and it's a contractual obligation. Now, in 2011, we were in contract negotiations with the Fraternal Order of Police, and there was a substantial change to the contract language that drives our staffing cost, which causes overtime. And the contract change on bullet number 1 says when a hard captain is working or when an acting captain is utilized and no sergeant is working, a sergeant will be held over from the previous shift and a sergeant called in early from the next shift to fill the vacancy. So here's how this works in reality. Joe, I'll use you for an example. So me and Joe are two sergeants on the shift. My captain, Joe's on his regular day off, his 2 days off. My captain calls in sick that day. I become the acting captain for the shift. Under this contract language, the department is obligated to hold over a sergeant from the previous shift and call one in early from the next shift and to serve as an acting sergeant because I'm serving as an acting captain. The cost of that is $421 for an 8-hour shift. Previously, we had used acting sergeants to fill that vacancy at a cost of $31 a shift. The contract language changed and still in effect. So then the second piece is, when a sergeant is held over and brought in early, no acting sergeant will be made. If no hard sergeant is available to either hold over or come in early, the vacant position, an acting sergeant will be made. Basically, this says this. There's a vacancy on shift 3. Joe's working shift 1, I'm working shift 2. They say, Ziegler, do you want to work over? I say, nope, I pass. Joe says, yeah, I'll work. I'll come in. I'll work 4 hours of overtime. This allows the department to use the half the shift, the 4 hours that I didn't work. We can make an acting sergeant for $31 or $30, and we're going to pay Joe $220 roughly to come in and serve as the acting, or to serve as the sergeant. When Joe comes in, the acting sergeant no longer works. He goes back to patrolling the streets. So this was signed in 2011. In 2013, because the department has been in negotiations with the Fraternal Order of Police for one-year contracts, 2012 came and ended. We signed another contract with this contract language in place. In 2013, we started contract negotiations again. This same contract language was in place. 2012 is when the department saw the biggest spike in our overtime budget. We were budgeted $247,000. We spent $570,000 on overtime due to contract language. At the end of 2013, the police department signed another contract with this language in place, and we began this year with this current contract language in play. Now, one thing that did happen in 2013, because we couldn't come to a resolution on resolving the language issue in contract negotiations, the chief of police mandated in July of 2013 that there would be no days off for sergeants or captains if it required the paying of overtime. That had a good impact on the budget. We saved some money. It had a negative impact on morale because what happened is that Joe wants a week of vacation. So he gets denied 2 of those days because those are my regular days off. So Joe could only get 5 days off, his 2 regular days off and 3 of his working days. The sergeants got upset about it. And here in a few minutes, I'll show you what was the result of that in 2014 was a letter of understanding that was signed by the Fraternal Order of Police, FOP President Scott Kirkpatrick and Chief Hansen. But let me talk a little bit about 2013. So in July, when the chief came out with the mandate that nobody would get a day off if it created overtime, I began tracking all the overtime in the Bureau of Operations. I wanted to see what was causing the overtime and then what was the cost to the department and to the unified government. So I tracked 3 things basically. I tracked late and extended calls, which I told you earlier was tied to calls for service. Then staffing. Staffing is those when we have to hold over and call in early to fill a sergeant vacancy, or if we're at minimal staffing. And basically on the police department, we have 5 police cars for each division with 5 officers assigned to those cars. They're bid every year. If for whatever reason we have an FMLA and then somebody calls in sick and we go down to 4 cars, we will pay officers 4 hours of overtime to hold over and call in early so that we can fill a 5th car. We believe it's a matter of officer safety and it enables us to provide the best service to the community. So that late and extended calls and the staffing. And then the last one is special. Those are like when we do the fall back and the spring forward time changes, that's kind of grouped in there. So you would think by looking at this that the problem is the late and extended calls. The numbers that are in this chart only represent an occurrence. So if you look at MPD, which is the Midtown Patrol Division, for late and extended calls, you see 477 occurrences of a late or extended call. Those later extended calls could be anything from 5 minutes to 2 hours. There's no set time on them as far as the represented in this chart. Now, when you look at Midtown, you think, wow, that's an outlier. That is way outside the norm. Because if you average these 4 patrol divisions together, there's about 287 later extended calls on average. That would be the average. So they're an outlier. They're outside the norm. Here's the reason why in 2013, we hired a new academy class. When our officers came out, we put them in Midtown Patrol Division because we had several vacancies. Well, they take a little bit longer to complete calls, a little bit longer to write reports because they're not quite seasoned officers yet. We're aware of the increase for the late extended calls, and we are trying to monitor that and see if we can't speed it up somehow, but we don't want to detract from the level of service that we provide to the citizens of Kansas City, Kansas. So then we look at the staffing. Each staffing number, so in Midtown we use it still, it's 136. That 136 represents a 4-hour block that we paid either an officer or a sergeant to come in because we were either contractually obligated to fill the position or we had a vacancy due to somebody calling in sick. So here's the financial impact to the unified government. For late and extended calls, officers worked 1,237 hours at a cost of $50,000. Sergeants worked 53 hours over at a cost of $4,000 for a total cost of $54,000. So you can see the impact for a late and extended call. I mean, I know we're talking money, but it's relatively small. So then we look at staffing, and we see that officers work 724 hours to cover shifts where we had a vacancy at a cost of $29,000, and sergeants work 1,628 hours at a cost of $86,000, at a total cost of $115,000. The staffing is what's causing is driving the overtime budget up. Particularly, it's tied to the contract language. So, what do we do about it? Well, we didn't resolve it in 2013 at contract negotiations. So we started the year with language from 2011. President Scott Kirkpatrick approached the chief and said, we'd like to resolve this issue. We would like to resolve the money that's being spent by the police department on overtime, as well as we would like to resolve the morale issue facing the department because captains and sergeants cannot get days off. You got to remember here, the sergeants are part of the collective bargaining unit, but the group that was negatively impacted was the captains who are not in the bargaining unit. But because their positions are tied directly to the contract, we could not grant them days off because it would create overtime. So President Kirkpatrick presented the letter to Chief Hansen.
Wait, Colonel, I don't mean to interrupt you, but can you back up? I just don't want you to keep going without me understanding that. So just a little bit slower.
Sorry.
So that's okay. I'm following you clearly up until that one point. So you said sergeants are...
Sergeants are in the bargaining unit. They're part of the contract, the bargaining unit. Captains are not.
What do you mean they don't get
They're
to...
exempt employees. They fall under management. They fall under the HR guide.
Okay, but they still have to abide by the contract?
Yes, because their positions are tied to contract language, because if they take a day off, it triggers the contract language on out of grade and filling the vacancy, a sergeant coming up as an acting captain, and then the holding over and calling in early, so we have a sergeant serving as a sergeant. So we had to deny them time off because of that.
That's hard to understand. I'll just tell you.
What he's referencing is, when the chief gave the directive, no one takes time off if it causes overtime. If a captain took a day off, it was going to charge sergeant overtime, so it was an adverse impact on them.
That makes better. Okay, thanks.
Sorry.
Thank you. That's all right. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is the letter of understanding that was signed between the FOP and the police department, particularly number one. Number one states only one hard striped sergeant or acting captain is required for any given shift. Now here's what this means. So the same scenario, me and Joe are 2 sergeants on the shift. Joe is on his regular days off, I'm by myself, the captain calls in sick. I become an acting captain by contract, but now, due to this letter of understanding, there is no need to call the sergeants in, hold one over, call one in early to serve as an acting sergeant. I can run the shift. I can run the shift by myself as an acting captain. That has a huge financial impact on our overtime budget because it eliminates that sergeant overtime. The third paragraph, there was no change in the second. The third paragraph It says on a shift where 2 sergeants are assigned, an acting sergeant may be utilized, manpower permitting, to allow a sergeant a day off on the regular day off of the other sergeant. Here's what that means. Me and Joe. Joe's on his regular days off. I say, hey, I'd like to have a week's vacation. They say, well, you can't have it if it's going to create overtime. Joe's on his regular days off. Now, it's fine. I can get my vacation in, a 7-day span of vacation, because on Joe's regular days off, instead of holding over and calling in early a sergeant to work on the shift, we just make an acting at a cost of $30. That had a huge impact on raising the morale among the sergeants and the captains on the department. So we've seen this as a win-win for the PD. So here's kind of the impact. I talked earlier about some numbers. The only numbers I put in this chart was 12 through 14. In 2011, the contract language got signed. 12, you see that our overtime there in red was $570,000. In 2013, the department took some corrective measures, still operating within the confines of the contract. The chief said no days off if it creates overtime. We got the overtime down to $432,000 that year. That was significant. Well, then we thought, okay, what was the potential impact of the LOU, or the letter of understanding, that President Kirkpatrick and Chief Hansen signed? I ran the numbers, and I come up that this year we're projected to spend about $254,000 on overtime. I understand that that is still above our budgeted amount. However, we're moving in the right direction. The other thing is that I don't work in budgeting, obviously, but the budgeting office ran a projection as well. They ran their projection based on our current spending rate. They projected that we're going to spend about $280,000 in overtime. So the number we came up with was off by $30,000. We'll see which one's right at the end of the year. But we believe that we're going in the right direction, and it's because we're working with the union and trying to resolve the contractual issues. The next thing we looked at is we combined the court and overtime, operational overtime. This is for the entire department, and you can see that it's kind of ebb and flowed. Peak year of 08, we spent about $2.5 million. 2012, we spent $2 million. And then in 2013, we spent about $1.7 million. So we said, okay, does our sworn strength impact this overtime at all? So here's what, I showed you the numbers earlier for the authorized staffing levels. The chart below shows the authorized sworn FTEs, and then the red line shows our actual officers working. So as you can see, it kind of ebb and flows just like the overtime. So you could argue this. You could argue that from 2006 to 2008, when we added 21 officers, that our overtime costs increased because we increased staffing. It does make a little sense. We added a vice unit that started going out and enforcing our vice laws. We have new officers coming on and more officers coming on. They do more work. They generate more rest. They generate more overtime. They generate more court overtime. So you come over to 2012 and you see that we dropped in our actual FTEs, the red line. You see that it dropped, but the overtime went up. We believe that's explained through the contract language. That we dropped again in 13. That's due, we believe, to the mandate that the chief put in place to try and correct the overtime issue. So that I've talked to you about the Bureau of Operations and overall kind of how the overtime works, but I want to talk to you now about the Bureau of Services. And there's two of the biggest bureaus in the police department are Bureau of Operations, which is where I work, which is the district patrol officers, school resource officers, and the community policing unit. The other half, which is mainly made up of our civilian staff, is the Bureau of Services. Now that includes the communications unit, the narcotics unit, the SCORE unit, K-9 unit, records and admin unit. A lot of our civilian people are located there. So the top number I pulled out because I noticed that the highest number or the highest cost in the Bureau of Services was the communications center. And as you can see, the communication centers started out in 09 kind of level, and then it went up and peaked 2011, 12, and then dropped in 13. Here's what happened in the communications unit. It is difficult to keep dispatchers on the police department. This is not a problem that's unique to KCK. This is an industry problem. It is a very stressful, multitasking, stressful position to be in. We have a hard time. We have a lot of turnover. So in 2013, we were authorized, or we had 47 pins for dispatchers. The county administrator authorized us to hire 41 dispatchers. So we hired 41 dispatchers in 2013, which helped drop the overtime, as well as we had a minimal staffing in communications, because you got to remember, we do East Patrol, West Patrol, South Patrol, Midtown Patrol, Bonner Springs, Edwardsville, a lead dispatcher, and we said the minimal staffing is going to be 9 dispatchers working on all 3 shifts, because the 2 provide relief for lunch breaks as well as 15-minute coffee breaks to get away from the console to kind of unplug. Well, in 2013, they looked at the numbers and said, well, shift 2, which is our day shift, say 6 to 2 in the afternoon, is probably, it had the lightest calls for service coming into the dispatch center. So they said, let's dial that back a little bit, make mandatory staffing 8. Worked out. The overtime dropped. We've tried to manage it. We're moving in the right direction. Currently, we have 38 dispatchers. We're authorized to hire 41. 2 of the 38 are in training, so we've got like 36 and a half dispatchers, basically. But I think that we're moving in the right direction as far as the communications unit and trying to manage and bring those costs down. So then the next line there is a blue line, and that represents the narcotics unit. The narcotics unit also has all of our federal task force officers in it. I think there's about 12 of them, and we signed a memorandum of understanding with the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Agency, Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms Bureau. We have an agreement with them that we will pay, say, $10,000 or $12,000 a year in overtime to those officers to work on the cases with those federal partners. That's why that overtime cost has been relatively level throughout the years, just under $200,000. So then I combined the 2 overtime costs. Actually, I combined all the overtime in the Bureau of Services. This includes the motorcycle unit. When they do initiatives for the state, they work overtime, and we get reimbursed for it. So here's what you don't see. I believe I'm pretty accurate in saying this. You don't see this accurately reflected in the budget documents for the police department. Because you see, about $200,000 a year is reimbursed to the unified government due to the agreements that we have from the federal agencies as well as with the state of Kansas. So when we factor that in, that trend line gets lowered down, and you see that we're $500,000, we go up to almost $700,000 in 2013, for $470,000. That's a more accurate reflection of the overtime spent in the Bureau of Services, because we deducted the money that the unified government is reimbursed. That money comes back and goes to the general fund. It does not come back to the police department. So I said, okay, so what's the impact of the adjusted overtime now to our overall budget? So I adjusted the overtime budgets, and the blue represents what we're budgeted, and the red represents what we actually spent after we make the adjustment. And you can look at 2012, even with the adjustment, we were at 1.7 million, we're at 1.5 million. We were still over budget. But if you look at 2013, we were budgeted 1.3, we spent 1.2 actual dollars, but if we add that money back in, the 200,000, we'd be at 1.4, we'd be over budget. So this is the impact. We believe this paints a more accurate picture of the overtime for the police department. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the out-of-grade pay. The out-of-grade pay has kind of ebb and flowed. There's 3 ranks that get out-of-grade pay. The detective, we pay officers to fill in as detectives if they're in a unit where detectives are working, so they get paid acting detective pay. Officers make acting sergeant pay. And then sergeants and detectives make acting captain pay. Now, I will tell you that for the police department, this seems like a pretty minimal cost, because we think it's real important to have proper supervision of the officers in the streets. As well as, just like I discussed earlier, if we make an acting sergeant, it costs us $30 for an 8-hour shift, opposed to $420 for an 8-hour shift. So there's a big savings there using the out-of-grade pay. This is tied to contract language. Contract language dictates when and how and under what conditions we make people acting sergeants, detectives, and acting captains. So that's my presentation. The police department realizes that our budgeted amount for the overtime is not a target for us. The budgeted amount of overtime is a tool for us to use when necessary to be able to accomplish the mission of the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. It is not a goal that we strive to hit, but it's sure not one that we want to go over. And we believe that we're being prudent in the way we manage our resources and trying to bring those costs down. That's all I have.
Commissioner Kane.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
You know, it's not new that the union and management would sit down and talk. And what I think we need to do is we need to do that across the board. With all the unions, sit down and talk to management. That's exactly what the UAW and GM did during the bankruptcy, and it works. And I think that's what you guys have done is an example of what we need to tell the rest of the folks. Because when we work together, then we are going to bring the numbers down. We're going to get where we're in the budget, because that's our goal. And both sides have to understand that. You know, so I thought your presentation was great, you know, and that should be the goal for not just the labor groups, but for all the groups. But let's cut where we can, and if we can't, then we need to tell them we can't do it. And in fact, we need more to do it. And then it's up to us to where we got to draw the line in the sand.
Commissioner Murguia.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say, unbelievable presentation. And I take away what Mike did. I mean, when you're talking about the union, you're talking about a partnership, you're talking about sitting down and having a conversation where both of you are looking at the unified government as a team. It's just a great example. And as a result of that, you both are winners. At least it sounds that way based on your presentation. Morale's gone up, officers are happy, that's fantastic, and our budget is lower. It doesn't get any better than that.
Thank you.
I also want to say, I think this addresses a key issue. When I first saw the numbers and I saw sergeants receiving $25,000 and $30,000 each in overtime, which was 25 and 30% sometimes, or 20% as much as their base salary, it was very concerning. I mean, in 2013, in 2012, they're making 18% of base, and in 2013, 15% of base. And it also created another problem with compression. That is very difficult to get someone to apply to be a captain when you're making significantly more as a sergeant with overtime and out-of-class pay. And if the captains weren't able to take time off because you couldn't ask a sergeant to fill in for them, the captain's position did not look very attractive for a couple of years. So I think this, the contract language that you all worked out in the memorandum is fantastic, and I think it helps morale and it helps our bottom line. I would be interested in looking at, in terms of the court overtime, if there is a way, and I don't know how this might work, but I would ask if you could look at, I think it's appropriate to pay an hour of travel time for people who are coming in off shift to go to court. That makes sense. It would be interesting to see, is there a way when you know there's going to be X amount of court time, you just know it's going to be, it's a percentage of, and you could probably run the numbers on the percentage of shift time that court time represents. Is there any way to be creative in terms of incorporating the court time into someone's shift and flexing shifts that would allow it to be encompassed without it all being overtime or as much of it being overtime? I don't know what the answer to that is. It sounds eminently complicated, but it does look like a place where we know there's going to be court time, and if there's a way that you could be creative in bringing down those overtime costs and encompassing them in someone's shift, I think that would be a big benefit. You clearly laid out a very complicated scenario, but I wonder if there isn't an opportunity to address that as well. I think that the opportunity, again, I liked what you talked about in terms of flexing your shifts based on low call volume. That kind of data-driven decision-making is something we have to have across departments. We have to be able to flex our staffing based on calls for service without compromising the safety of our our employees or our public. But we do know based on data when more calls come in and when they don't, and we've got to staff accordingly. So I think that, and again, that comes back to my question about court. Is there a way to use that similar data-driven model to look at a spreadsheet about how you could address the court time as in a similar fashion? So anyway, I just encourage you in that respect. But I do think you have brought down overtime. The police have brought down overtime significantly. And I think that there is, in all of our public safety, there is going to be some inherent overtime. I don't think any of us are naive enough to believe that we're going to eliminate overtime, either from public safety or from the organization as a whole. The thing I want to get to is what contractual language is driving it. And you spoke to it, and I think we heard in each of these, there's contractual language for each department that helps drive overtime, and there's staffing needs that help drive overtime. Getting this complete picture and having recommendations that we can do as an elected body to drive down the costs so that we can find a sustainable model, I think that's exactly what we want to do. So thank you for your presentation tonight as well. Commissioner Walker.
Lieutenant Colonel.
You speak into the microphone, sir, please.
Do they, when you, so I'm not, they get an hour travel time, but is it still the contract language, you get a 2-hour minimum for being in court?
No, the 2-hour minimum you're speaking of is, we deal with barricaded gunmen and hostage situations. If we hit the page to call out our TAC team, they get suited up at home, they're rolling in. 30 minutes into it, we send out another page that says, hey, you guys aren't needed, we've resolved it. By contract language, they're entitled to 2 hours of callback because it got them out of bed in the middle of the night, they got suited, they were en route.
Well, what happens if they come to court? I mean, they go to the district attorney's office and they come to the municipal court. They get a minimum of 1 hour. They show up and the case has been continued, or there's a plea or whatever, they turn around and go home. What if they're there for 3-4 hours waiting for their trial? They get their actual time, do they not?
They get their actual time plus the 1 hour travel time.
Okay. Now, I guess, Mayor, I would like to see some kind of analysis about court continuances, how many times an officer is required to show up on a given case. I realize I've been gone for a while and maybe that's all been handled, but it was not uncommon for defense attorneys to find some compelling or lack of compelling reason to seek a continuance in the hopes that they would find a day for some reason the officer's held over, he doesn't show up, he's sick, whatever it might be, so that when the case is called, the case will be dismissed, and usually it's not worth the cost of having the officer rewrite the ticket and serve the guy in order to pursue the case, at least in municipal court. So I wonder how much of our overtime could be reduced in court time by better policies. I haven't been in municipal court, so I don't know. Mr. Moore, you know anything about it? How many continuances do they give them?
I believe it's 2 continuances, and then the case is going to be heard. I think there's 1 for each side, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's
So
correct.
if each side takes one, that's 2 days of overtime that we've paid for an officer to show up, in which it was fairly predictable, at least the defense will usually use theirs. Unless they know the officer didn't show up, right?
I guess typically.
I guess what I'm getting at is, and I don't know that it would be the same in district court about continuances, Mr. Gorman, do they abuse the continuance prerogative, defense attorneys?
It's run a little bit different than municipal court. They're not subpoenaed on a regular basis until there's a preliminary hearing. Preliminary hearings a number of months down the road.
Can you come ahead and speak to the microphone just so the folks in TV land can hear you?
The district courts run a little bit different because we don't subpoena an officer until either preliminary hearing or the jury trial itself. The jury trial, generally we have enough notice, we can call the officers off that they're not needed. Preliminary hearings are held on 1 day of the week, Thursdays only. So, and that preliminary hearing is a number of months down the road from the arrest that we generally are able to notify officers. Sometimes that notification isn't always clear. That causes problems that we have officers in, but it's not a daily basis like municipal court where they're showing up for a ticket not knowing whether it's going to go or not. The other problem, the third area though for us is there's overtime, and I'm certain it's considered court overtime. When we have to prepare for a jury trial, we pre-trial with that officer. And, one of the things I think it was the mayor mentioned, can we start choosing our times so that it's during a shift? And we're able to do that obviously with the daytime officers, have them in. The afternoon shift officers, we've got about a 2-hour block where we can get them in. Sometimes that works. The nighttime officers, obviously we can't do that. We need a pre-trial with every officer prior to a jury trial. And we've tried to make efforts with the police department to try to cut down that overtime, doing it during their shift.
Thank you.
That's great.
Well, I leave you with the thought that perhaps the county administrator, we could look at court time coordination and how many days a month an officer has in court. It'd be easier to have him one day a month and all his cases are up that date. I can't control what the judges do, but a lot of the money we're spending is in court overtime, as you can see. So if there's any way to make that work better for the officer and for us, we might be able to reduce it by not allowing continuances. You come to court, you come to trial, and there are municipal courts that are run that way. You have to actually be dying or have a loved one dying before they'll give you a continuance.
Commissioner, if I might, earlier this evening I had a conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Steele, and I'd asked him if we couldn't arrange a meeting with Chief Hansen and whoever she needed there so that we could discuss the policies between their office and ours so that there's a more smooth operation between subpoenaing officers and them appearing in that.
Yeah, and then the next question would be, is when you have a subpoena, you often know weeks in advance when that subpoena is going to hit. Is there a way to flex schedules where someone could come in 4 hours early for a shift one day and then could leave early that day so that hits during their shift? I don't know how complicated that is. I mean, it sounds complicated, but it seems like something that'd be worth at least looking at if that's a possibility.
That would have to be negotiated with the Fraternal Order of Police.
Okay. Yeah, that would be something I think would be worth. The other question I have, when we recover court costs, when someone gets sued and there's court costs, and someone has to pay court costs, do court costs include our sheriff's deputies for bringing someone in? Do court costs include our police officers who come in? What is recoverable under court costs that we can charge people?
Generally, I think the only thing I'm prepared to say is that generally we do not request overtime of officers in court costs. I'd have to look into whether we actually can do that or not. But the reality of it is, Mayor, even if we request it and the court orders it, we don't recover a very high percentage of court costs. As a matter of fact, there's kind of a policy. The court turns a lot of that over to a private firm to attempt to try to recover. And I don't think the percentage they recover is very high.
I'm not surprised by that. I just wonder if it's an opportunity that if we can include the costs that are being imposed on us by attorneys who are continuing, why not charge them? Whether if we collect a low percentage, it's more money than we had before. So, all right. Any other questions or comments for the police department? Well, it's been a very long evening. I want to thank the Sheriff, Chief Jones, and Colonel Ziegler for coming in tonight. I want to thank you for really a comprehensive look, the most comprehensive look I've ever seen at the drivers of costs and overtime and out-of-class pay. And I just want to say our goal needs to be to continue to drive those costs down. And I think we heard some options today that can help us drive those costs down to make our departments more sustainable long-term. So thank you all for your time in this, and we are officially adjourned.